What is the new growth path? Many people are saying it is the policy that will replace the macroeconomic policy that we've known as GEAR.
Well, firstly, one has to be a little careful about stating that we've had a macroeconomic policy called GEAR in place because parts of GEAR were put in place, other parts that did not meet with the desire of the trade unions were not put into place. And many would argue that that was one of the reasons why it was not quite as successful as one would have liked to have seen.
Right.
But there were parts of GEAR that were significantly successful. Government managed to reduce its debts significantly, which have now seen it through this latest recession quite favorably without the panic that has hit a lot of European countries and even the United States about that. Now, the new growth path has as its principal objective to overcome one of the big structural defects of the economy in recent years. Even though the economy has seen better growth, other than in 2009, the global recession, even though the economy has seen better growth than it had for 3 decades, the fact is that people have been disappointed at the extent of the number of jobs that were created by that growth. And the new growth path has as its principal objective the desire to create 500,000 new jobs, decent jobs per annum, 5 million over a 10-year period. Now, and to reduce the unemployment rate from 25% down to 15% as a consequence. Now, if you do the sums, broadly speaking, if you manage to create 500,000 jobs per year, you should be able to bring down the unemployment rate from 25 to 15%.
Feasibility here, in order to create at least 500,000 jobs per annum, the economy needs to grow somewhere in the region of 6, even 7%, and certainly the Minister of Economic Development has admitted that much. But in the era of growth, the unions argue we had jobless growth, as you referred to. The economy grew, but we didn't see quality jobs created. What's going to change this time around?
Well, unfortunately, if 3 structural defects of the South African economy are not addressed, I'm afraid nothing will change. The first is the very weak level of education and skills development in the country. Many of those who are unemployed not because they can't, because there are no jobs, but because these people are unemployable. They do not have any skill or métier that can be used by the market. Secondly, the unions, if they continue demanding minimum wages, high levels of decent nature of the jobs, high quality of the jobs, well, employers are going to feel continuously that it's too hard, it's just not worth the effort of taking on workers. And thirdly, the way in which the economy is dominated at the moment by big government and parastatal organizations, concentrated big business sector that dominates a lot of the economy, and then on the other side a very powerful trade union movement, so-called golden triangle, who some might see as having a cushy relationship. Small business doesn't appear in the whole scheme of things, and although government pays lip service to it, the fact is that small business is the way in which employment creation can be generated most effectively.
Those who refer to the good elements of the new growth path talk about the fact that the big drive for government to invest in infrastructure means dividends for the state by way of taxation levies and those sorts of things, that government has actually incentivized innovation and entrepreneurship, talking about an SME fund that the President referred to in the last State of the Nation address, and that plan will be elaborated on a little bit more. Through the Industrial Action Policy Program, the push for local content means that there will be incentives for people to innovate in the local manufacturing industry in South Africa. And some are saying if those proposals are followed through, it should be very positive for this economy.
Well, let's break those down. Firstly, the government's intention to spend a lot of money on infrastructural investment. Yes, that's wonderful if they manage to do that. We desperately need more such investment. The problem is that government is not managing to spend the funds that have been set aside for it. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why economic growth and job creation in recent times has not been as forthcoming as might otherwise have been the case. Partly because the government has lost many of the skills required to implement such projects. Secondly, in terms of the assistance given to small business, yes, there have been a few funds set aside. In the broader scheme of things, you know, to the layman, a couple of billion rand sounds like a huge amount of money, but relative to a government budget of nearly 1 trillion rand, it's a drop in the ocean. You know, it's that kind of thing.
1 in 4 South Africans is unemployed. You refer to that. 5 million jobs by the year 2020. Which are the sectors that the government ought to prioritize? Well,
the government has now prioritized agriculture, mining, manufacturing, and tourism, and green industries as activities, largely because it sees all those sectors as being very labor intensive, and proportionately, therefore, they may be able to create more jobs. The problem that we face is that if you look at the last 30 years, the direction in which the South African economy has been growing has been precisely in the opposite direction, namely services, which have required more skilled persons. Agriculture, mining and manufacturing have been in decline. Average growth rates, I mean, in mining it's been negative, in agriculture around 1% per year, and manufacturing 2% per year. So it's going to take a fairly dramatic move to change that combination of sectors, sectoral growth.
You referred to what was the quasi-policy, macroeconomic policy of the previous administration, GEAR, and one of its successes being able to manage a government deficit and manage the debt situation of the country. We know that the Minister, Pravin Gordhan, believes that the deficit is now manageable, something like 4% of GDP. Why would the new growth plan undermine all of those efforts?
Funnily enough, that's the one area where the new growth path actually coincides with the GEAR strategy. One of the big key objectives of the new growth path is to try and bring about a weaker currency as a means of making South African industry more competitive to facilitate greater job creation. But of course, the way in which it wants to do that is to pursue lower real interest rates, and the immediate criticism would be that that could be inflationary. So the flip side of that is the new growth path says, okay, we pursue looser monetary policy, but in deference to that, we will have tighter fiscal policy. So the new growth path supports the desire to reduce the deficit, but that is the very factor that one of the factors that the trade unions, COSATU, are opposing now about the new growth path.
What about the positive elements, again, that are being put forward, and that, firstly, a lot of people don't have jobs. So let's not debate quality of job, let's just get people earning some kind of an income.
Well, that's a huge debate in itself.
Exactly, but let's just get past that particular caveat. If people have some sort of an income, even if it's short-term labor, 6 months, 8 months, earning something, it has benefits for the economy because they're going to spend that money in the South African economy. That's point number one. Secondly, if you have more young people employed in one way or another, it's going to reduce the crime rate in the country, and of course having people employed at whatever level is a dent on poverty. The broader social impact of the new growth path.
There is no doubt that the principal objective of the new growth path to reduce unemployment, to create 500,000 jobs per year, no one would disagree with that as a primary objective. The question is the skepticism that people have as to whether the measures that will be taken to achieve that objective will be attained. A lot of the new growth path sets certain objectives in education and skills development, but people look at the matric exam results and say those objectives are unattainable. And there are people say, well, it's wonderful if government should embark upon huge infrastructural projects, but if it can't implement those projects and get them going in the first instance, there's no point in talking about that. We won't achieve that job creation.